Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez had always believed that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but acting despite it. Standing in the dusty courtyard of Forward Operating Base Thunder in Afghanistan, she watched the morning sun cast long shadows across the compound. The air was thick with anticipation as her unit prepared for another patrol through the volatile Helmand province. Maria had been in the Marines for 8 years, earning respect through dedication and an unwavering commitment to her fellow soldiers. At 29, she was one of the few female non-commissioned officers in her unit, a position she had fought hard to achieve. Her dark eyes held the wisdom of someone who had seen too much. Yet her spirit remained unbroken. The base housed nearly 600 Marines and soldiers from various units, all working together in one of the most dangerous regions of Afghanistan. Maria's squad was known for their tight bond and exceptional performance under pressure. They called her Sergeant Steele, not because she was cold, but because her resolve never bent under the weight of responsibility. On this particular morning, something felt different. The usual chatter among the troops was subdued, and even the experienced veterans seemed more alert than usual. Intelligence reports had indicated increased insurgent activity in their patrol area, but that was nothing new. What concerned Maria was the look in her commanding officer's eyes during the briefing. Lance Corporal Jake Thompson, barely 21, was preparing his gear nearby. He had joined Maria's squad 6 months ago, fresh from training and eager to prove himself. Despite his youth, Jake had quickly earned the respect of his peers through his quick thinking and unwavering loyalty. Maria had taken him under her wing, seeing in him the same determination that had driven her own military career. The patrol route would take them through 3 villages known for harboring Taliban sympathizers. Their mission was to establish contact with local leaders and assess the security situation. It was routine work that could turn deadly in an instant, something every Marine understood but never discussed openly. As Maria checked her equipment one final time, she noticed Jake struggling with his radio pack. Without hesitation, she walked over to help him adjust the straps. This simple act of mentorship was typical of Maria's leadership style. She believed in taking care of her people, knowing that their lives might depend on the smallest details. The convoy of armored vehicles rolled out of the base at 800 hours, kicking up clouds of dust that hung in the still morning air. Maria rode in the lead vehicle, her eyes constantly scanning the landscape for signs of danger. The rocky terrain and sparse vegetation provided countless hiding spots for potential threats. Their first stop was the village of Karabad, where they were scheduled to meet with the local elder. The village appeared quiet, almost too quiet for Maria's liking. Children who usually ran out to greet the American soldiers were nowhere to be seen. Even the usual sounds of daily life seemed muted. As they dismounted from their vehicles, Maria felt the familiar weight of her gear and the comforting presence of her rifle. She had learned to trust her instincts over the years, and right now those instincts were screaming that something was wrong. She caught Jake's eye and gave him a subtle hand signal to stay alert. The meeting with the village elder went smoothly, perhaps too smoothly. The old man's nervous demeanor and reluctance to make eye contact raised red flags for Maria. Years of experience had taught her to read people, and this man was clearly frightened of something more than just the presence of American soldiers. After completing their business in Karabad, the patrol moved toward their second objective. The road between villages was known to be particularly dangerous, with several IED incidents reported in recent weeks. Maria ordered the convoy to maintain maximum vigilance and reduce speed through the most vulnerable sections. It was Jake who first spotted the suspicious object on the roadside. His sharp eyes caught the glint of something metallic partially buried in the sand about 50 meters ahead. Maria immediately called for a halt and established a security perimeter, while the explosive ordnance disposal team was summoned. The tension was palpable as everyone waited for the EOD specialists to arrive. These moments of uncertainty were among the most challenging aspects of military service in a combat zone. Every soldier knew that their lives hung in the balance, dependent on the skill and courage of their teammates. While waiting for the bomb disposal team, Maria kept her squad alert and ready. She moved among her Marines, offering quiet words of encouragement and ensuring everyone maintained their focus. Leadership in these moments wasn't about giving orders. It was about providing the steady presence that kept good soldiers from making fatal mistakes. The EOD team confirmed Maria's suspicions. The object was indeed an improvised explosive device, carefully concealed and powerful enough to destroy an entire vehicle. As they worked to neutralize the threat, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a very long day. Jake approached her position and quietly reported that he had noticed unusual movement in the hills overlooking their location. Maria raised her binoculars and scanned the ridgeline, spotting what appeared to be armed figures moving between the rocks. The realization hit her like a cold wave. They were being watched, possibly targeted. She immediately radioed their situation back to base command, requesting aerial surveillance and a possible change to their patrol route. The response was swift but not encouraging. Air support was unavailable due to operations elsewhere, and they were ordered to continue their mission while maintaining heightened security protocols. As the EOD team finished their work and declared the road safe, Maria gathered her squad leaders for a quick conference. She outlined her concerns about the suspicious activity in the surrounding hills and emphasized the need for extreme caution as they proceeded. Every Marine understood that they were potentially walking into a carefully planned ambush. The convoy resumed its movement toward the second village, but Maria ordered a tactical adjustment to their route. Instead of taking the main road as planned, they would approach from an unexpected direction, using a longer but potentially safer path through the valley. This decision would later prove to be crucial in the events that were about to unfold. As they crested a small rise overlooking the valley, Maria felt a chill run down her spine. Something was definitely wrong, and every instinct told her that her Marines were walking into danger. She had no way of knowing that within the next few hours, she would face a choice that would test everything she believed about duty, honor, and sacrifice. The second village of Nazirabad appeared peaceful as the convoy approached, but Maria's unease only grew stronger. The absence of normal village sounds and the way local residents seemed to have vanished into their homes painted a picture of a community bracing for violence. She ordered her Marines to maintain dispersed formations as they entered the settlement. Jake was positioned as point man for the dismounted patrol, his youthful enthusiasm balanced by the training Maria had drilled into him over the past months. He moved with the calculated precision of a soldier who understood that every step could be his last. Yet his confidence never wavered. Maria watched him with the pride of a mentor and the protective instincts of a seasoned leader. The village elder they were supposed to meet was notably absent when they reached the designated meeting point. In his place stood a nervous young man who claimed to be the elder's son. His stammering explanation about his father's sudden illness did nothing to ease Maria's growing suspicion that something was terribly wrong. As the Marines spread out to secure the area, Maria noticed that many of the village buildings showed signs of recent abandonment. Clothes still hung on lines, but doors stood slightly ajar in a way that suggested hasty departures. Even the village dogs seemed to have disappeared, leaving an eerie silence that made every footstep seem unnaturally loud. The meeting with the elder's son yielded little useful intelligence. The young man's answers to their questions were vague and contradictory, and his eyes kept darting toward the hills surrounding the village. Maria's Arabic was good enough to catch subtle nuances in his speech that suggested he was being deliberately evasive. Corporal Williams, Maria's most experienced squad leader, approached her with additional concerns. His team had discovered fresh tire tracks leading to and from the village, patterns that didn't match the vehicles typically used by local civilians. More troubling were the empty ammunition casings they had found partially buried near one of the buildings. Maria made the decision to cut their visit short and move on to the final objective of their patrol. As they prepared to depart, she gathered her squad leaders for a final briefing. Her instincts were screaming warnings, but their orders were clear: complete the mission and return to base. She emphasized the need for maximum vigilance and reminded everyone to trust their training. The route to the third village took them through a narrow valley that offered excellent concealment for potential ambushes. Maria ordered the convoy to increase speed through this section while maintaining strict communications protocols. Every Marine understood that they were in what military tacticians called a kill zone, terrain that favored an attacking force. It was during this movement that the first shot rang out. The distinctive crack of a sniper rifle echoed off the valley walls, followed immediately by the metallic ping of a bullet striking the lead vehicle's armor plating. Maria's training kicked in instantly as she ordered the convoy to halt and take defensive positions. Jake's vehicle was second in the column, positioning him perfectly to provide covering fire for the lead element. Maria watched with professional pride as he and his team moved with textbook precision, establishing fields of fire that would protect the convoy from multiple directions. His calm demeanor under fire was exactly what she had worked to develop in him. The attack intensified quickly as multiple shooters opened fire from concealed positions in the rocky hills. Maria realized they were facing a well-coordinated ambush involving at least a dozen fighters armed with rifles, rocket-propelled grenades, and automatic weapons. The enemy had chosen their ground well, forcing the Marines into a defensive position with limited options for maneuver. Radio communications became a lifeline as Maria coordinated with her squad leaders to establish an effective defense. She called for immediate air support and medical evacuation capabilities, while simultaneously directing her Marines' return fire. Years of training and combat experience had prepared her for this moment, but the intensity of the attack was beyond anything she had previously encountered. The sound of incoming RPGs added a new dimension of terror to the battle. These rocket-propelled grenades could penetrate vehicle armor and cause devastating casualties among dismounted troops. Maria watched in horror as one exploded near Jake's position, sending shrapnel flying in all directions and momentarily disappearing him in a cloud of smoke and debris. When the smoke cleared, Maria felt a surge of relief to see Jake still fighting, but she could tell he had been wounded. Blood was visible on his left arm and his movement seemed slightly hampered. Despite his injuries, he continued to lay down accurate covering fire, allowing other Marines to reposition to more defensible locations. The battle raged for what felt like hours but was actually only 23 minutes according to Maria's watch. During this time, she moved continuously among her Marines, directing fire, redistributing ammunition, and providing the leadership that kept her unit functioning as an effective fighting force. Her calm voice on the radio became an anchor for Marines who were experiencing their first serious firefight out air. Support finally arrived in the form of attack helicopters that began engaging the enemy positions with devastating effect. The tide of battle shifted quickly as the insurgents found themselves caught between the Marines' defensive fire and the helicopters' more powerful weapons. Several enemy positions fell silent as the aircraft methodically eliminated threats. As the immediate danger subsided, Maria began assessing casualties and damage to equipment. 3 Marines had been wounded, including Jake, but none of the injuries appeared life-threatening. The vehicles had sustained significant damage but remained operational enough to complete the journey back to base. It was during this assessment that Maria noticed Jake was not responding normally to her questions. His wound appeared minor, but his pupils were dilated and his speech was slightly slurred. Her medical training immediately raised red flags about the possibility of a traumatic brain injury from the RPG. Explosion's concussive effect. The nearest medical facility capable of treating serious head injuries was over an hour away by ground convoy, and the route would take them through additional areas of known enemy activity. Maria faced a critical decision: attempt the dangerous journey to medical care or wait for medical evacuation by helicopter, which might not arrive for several hours due to ongoing operations elsewhere. Jake's condition seemed to be deteriorating slowly but steadily. What had initially appeared to be minor combat fatigue was beginning to look more like serious neurological trauma. Maria knew that every minute of delay could mean the difference between full recovery and permanent disability, or even death. She gathered her remaining squad leaders and presented them with the situation. The consensus was unanimous. They needed to get Jake to medical care immediately, regardless of the risks involved. Maria looked at her wounded Marine, seeing not just a soldier under her command but a young man whose future hung in the balance. The weight of command had never felt heavier. Maria made her decision with the swift certainty that had defined her military career. Jake needed immediate medical attention, and she would not allow bureaucracy or protocol to cost him his life. She radioed base command, informing them of her intention to proceed directly to the forward surgical team at Camp Dwyer. Despite orders to return to their home base, the response from command was immediate and harsh. Colonel Morrison's voice crackled through the radio with barely contained anger as he reminded Maria that deviating from approved routes without authorization was a serious breach of protocol. The route to Camp Dwyer would take them through territory that had not been cleared by intelligence and where no backup forces were available if they encountered trouble. Maria listened to the colonel's concerns with professional respect, but her response was unwavering. She explained Jake's deteriorating condition and her assessment that he would not survive the longer journey back to base. Her voice carried the quiet authority of a non-commissioned officer who had made an irrevocable decision based on the welfare of her Marines. The silence that followed her transmission stretched for nearly a minute before Colonel Morrison's response came through. His tone had shifted from anger to resigned understanding as he officially logged her decision as unauthorized but necessary. He promised to have medical personnel standing by at Camp Dwyer and warned her that she would face serious consequences if her assessment proved incorrect preparing for the journey. To Camp Dwyer required quick thinking and tactical expertise. Maria redistributed her Marines among the remaining vehicles to maximize their defensive capabilities, while ensuring that Jake received constant medical attention during transport. Corporal Williams volunteered to ride with Jake, using his field medic training to monitor the wounded Marine's vital signs. The route Maria chose was longer, but offered better defensive positions if they encountered enemy forces. She had studied the terrain extensively during her previous deployments and knew every ridge, valley, and potential ambush site along the way. This knowledge would prove crucial in the dangerous journey ahead. Jake's condition continued to worry Maria as they prepared to move out. His speech was becoming increasingly slurred, and he seemed confused about basic facts like the date and his location. These symptoms suggested a serious traumatic brain injury that would require immediate surgical intervention to prevent permanent damage or death. The convoy moved out with Maria's vehicle in the lead, setting a pace that balanced the need for speed with tactical caution. Every Marine understood the gravity of their situation. They were essentially conducting an unauthorized mission through hostile territory with a critically wounded comrade whose life hung in the balance. The first hour of travel passed without incident, but Maria's unease grew with each passing mile. The route she had chosen was known to be used by insurgent forces moving between their mountain strongholds and their operational areas in the valley. Every curve in the road could conceal an ambush, and every ridge could hide enemy observers calling in their position. Communications with base remained sporadic due to the mountainous terrain, but Maria was able to update Colonel Morrison on their progress twice during the journey. His responses were terse but supportive, indicating that he understood the necessity of her decision, even if he couldn't officially approve of her methods. It was Corporal Williams who first noticed that Jake was having difficulty staying conscious. The wounded Marine would drift off for several minutes at a time, then wake with confusion about where he was and what had happened. This symptom pattern was consistent with increasing intracranial pressure, a potentially fatal complication of head injuries. Maria ordered the convoy to increase speed despite the additional risk this created. Jake's life was now measured in minutes rather than hours, and every decision had to prioritize getting him to surgical care as quickly as possible. The roads they traveled were barely more than dirt tracks, and the increased pace sent clouds of dust billowing behind the vehicles. The ambush came without warning as they crested a hill overlooking a narrow bridge. Muzzle flashes erupted from multiple positions on both sides of the road, and the characteristic whistle of incoming mortars filled the air. Maria realized immediately that this was a well-planned attack, designed to trap vehicles in the open, where they would be most vulnerable. Unlike their previous engagement, this ambush showed signs of professional military planning. The enemy positions were mutually supporting, their fields of fire overlapped to eliminate dead space, and they had positioned themselves to prevent the convoy from either advancing or retreating. Maria found herself facing the most dangerous tactical situation of her career. Her response was immediate and aggressive. Rather than stopping to fight from the exposed position on the hill crest, she ordered the convoy to punch through the ambush at maximum speed. This decision violated standard tactical doctrine, but standard doctrine did not account for having a dying Marine who needed surgery within the next hour. The next 5 minutes were the longest of Maria's military career. Enemy fire raked the vehicles as they raced through the kill zone, with bullets striking armor plating and shattering windows. The sound was deafening, a constant crescendo of gunfire, shouting, and engine noise that made communication nearly impossible. Jake's vehicle took the heaviest fire as it followed Maria's lead vehicle through the ambush. She watched in her mirrors as bullets sparked off its armor, praying that none would find their way through the protective plating to harm the already wounded Marine inside. Corporal Williams later reported that Jake remained unconscious throughout the entire engagement, his condition having deteriorated to the point where he was unresponsive to external stimuli. Breaking through the far side of the ambush zone, Maria felt a momentary surge of relief that was quickly tempered by the realization that they had sustained additional casualties. 2 more Marines had been wounded by shrapnel, though neither appeared to be in critical condition. More seriously, one of their vehicles was showing signs of mechanical distress that could force them to halt before reaching medical care. The radio crackled with an unexpected transmission from Camp Dwyer. A medical evacuation helicopter was being dispatched to meet them at a predetermined landing zone just 10 minutes from their current position. Colonel Morrison had apparently used his influence to expedite Jake's medical care. Despite his earlier objections to Maria's unauthorized mission, Maria felt a complex mixture of relief and apprehension as she acknowledged the transmission. Relief that Jake would soon receive the care he desperately needed, but apprehension about the consequences she would face for her decision to disobey orders. Military justice was swift and unforgiving when it came to unauthorized actions, regardless of their motivation. The landing zone was a small clearing beside the road that offered barely enough space for a helicopter to land safely. As the convoy approached, Maria could see the dust cloud in the distance that indicated the medical evacuation aircraft was already en route. For the first time in hours, she allowed herself to believe that Jake might survive this day. Transferring Jake from the vehicle to the helicopter required careful coordination to avoid further injury to his damaged brain. The flight medics worked with professional efficiency, establishing intravenous lines and monitoring equipment while asking Corporal Williams detailed questions about Jake's condition and the circumstances of his injury. As the helicopter lifted off with Jake aboard, Maria watched until it disappeared into the afternoon sky. She had risked her career, her Marines, and her own life to save one wounded soldier. Whether that decision would be viewed as heroic or reckless remained to be seen, but she knew in her heart that she had made the only choice her conscience would allow. The journey back to Forward Operating Base Thunder was conducted in heavy silence. Maria's Marines understood that their sergeant had potentially sacrificed her career to save Jake's life, and the weight of that sacrifice hung over the convoy like a storm cloud. Each mile brought them closer to an uncertain future, where Maria would have to answer for her decision to disobey direct orders. Colonel Morrison was waiting in the command post when Maria arrived for debriefing. His expression was unreadable, but the formal way he addressed her as Staff Sergeant Rodriguez rather than using her familiar call sign suggested that this conversation would be strictly by the book. The presence of the base's legal officer and the chaplain indicated that serious consequences were being considered. The debriefing lasted over 3 hours, with Maria providing detailed accounts of every decision she had made during the patrol. She spoke with the calm precision of a professional soldier, accepting full responsibility for her actions while defending the tactical and medical reasoning behind each choice. Her voice never wavered, even when discussing the potential consequences of her unauthorized mission. Colonel Morrison's questions were thorough and often pointed, focusing on why she had chosen to disregard direct orders and place her entire unit at risk for one Marine. Maria's responses were honest and direct. She believed that no Marine should be left behind when medical care was available, regardless of the personal cost to herself or the tactical situation. The legal officer's presence became more significant when he began outlining the potential charges Maria could face. Disobeying direct orders in a combat zone was a serious offense that could result in court-martial, reduction in rank, and even imprisonment. The fact that her decision had been motivated by concern for a wounded Marine would be considered as mitigation, but might not be sufficient to avoid severe punishment. News of Jake's surgery began filtering back to the base during Maria's debriefing. The initial reports were encouraging but cautious. The surgical team had successfully relieved the pressure on his brain, but his ultimate prognosis would not be clear for several days. The doctors confirmed that any delay in treatment could have resulted in permanent brain damage or death. Maria felt a profound sense of relief when she learned that Jake was expected to make a full recovery. This news vindicated her decision to risk everything for his welfare, but she also understood that the military justice system would evaluate her actions based on the information available at the time, not on the eventual outcome. The next 48 hours passed slowly as Maria waited for a decision on her fate. She was temporarily relieved of her command duties while the investigation continued, leaving her in a strange limbo where she remained on base, but had no official responsibilities. Her Marines made it clear through subtle gestures and brief conversations that they supported her decision completely. Word of Maria's situation spread throughout the base with the speed that characterizes military communities. Soldiers who had never met her personally began approaching her with quiet expressions of support. Many shared stories of Marines who had been saved by leaders willing to take extraordinary risks, creating an atmosphere of solidarity around her case. The investigation expanded to include testimony from every Marine who had participated in the patrol. Their accounts were unanimous in supporting Maria's version of events and emphasizing the dire nature of Jake's medical situation. Several squad leaders testified that they would have made the same decision if placed in Maria's position. Corporal Williams provided particularly compelling testimony about Jake's deteriorating condition during the convoy to Camp Dwyer. His detailed medical observations, recorded in real time during the journey, painted a clear picture of a young Marine whose life had hung in the balance. The flight medics who had treated Jake during his evacuation corroborated this assessment. On the third day after the incident, Maria received word that Jake had awakened and was asking to speak with her. Permission was granted for a video call to the hospital in Germany, where he was receiving treatment. Seeing his face on the screen, alert and clearly recovering, was one of the most emotional moments of Maria's military career. Jake's first words to her were an apology for causing so much trouble. Maria had to fight back tears as she assured him that he had done nothing wrong, and that she was proud of his performance under fire. Their conversation was brief but meaningful, establishing that Jake understood the risks Maria had taken on his behalf. The formal hearing was scheduled for the following week, giving both sides time to prepare their cases. Maria's assigned defense counsel was optimistic about the outcome, pointing to the strong medical evidence supporting her assessment of Jake's condition and the unanimous support of her subordinates. However, he also cautioned that military discipline required consequences for disobeying orders, regardless of the motivation. During the days leading up to the hearing, Maria found herself reflecting on her 13-year military career and the values that had guided her service. She had always believed that the mission came first, but she had learned that sometimes the mission included ensuring that every Marine made it home alive. Her decision to save Jake had been instinctive, based on years of training and a deep commitment to her fellow soldiers. The base chaplain sought her out several times during this period, offering spiritual counsel and a sympathetic ear. These conversations helped Maria process the emotional weight of her situation and maintain her equilibrium despite the uncertainty surrounding her future. She found strength in the knowledge that she had acted according to her conscience and her understanding of military values. Letters of support began arriving from unexpected sources. Former Marines who had served under Maria's leadership wrote detailed accounts of her character and dedication to her troops. Fellow non-commissioned officers from other units provided testimony about her reputation for putting Marines first in every situation. Perhaps most significantly, Jake's parents wrote a heartfelt letter thanking Maria for saving their son's life. They described how their family had been devastated by news of his injuries and overwhelmed with gratitude when they learned about Maria's decision to risk everything for his welfare. The letter concluded with a promise to attend the hearing and speak on her behalf if permitted. The media attention surrounding Maria's case began to grow as word spread beyond the military community. Several military advocacy organizations expressed interest in her situation, viewing it as a test case for how the military balances discipline with care for wounded soldiers. This external pressure added another layer of complexity to what had begun as a straightforward disciplinary matter. Maria tried to avoid thinking about the potential outcomes of her hearing. She had made her choice based on her training, her values, and her assessment of the situation. Whatever consequences followed would be accepted as the price of doing what she believed was right. Her only regret was that her actions might have placed her Marines in additional danger. As the hearing date approached, Maria noticed that the atmosphere on base had changed. Soldiers who normally would have avoided involvement in a disciplinary case were openly expressing support for her position. This solidarity was both humbling and concerning, as she did not want her situation to undermine military discipline or create divisions within the command structure. The night before her hearing, Maria stood alone on the base's observation deck, looking out at the Afghan landscape that had shaped so much of her military experience. Tomorrow would determine whether her career would continue or end, but she felt at peace with her decision. She had acted to save a Marine's life, and no punishment could change the fact that Jake Thompson was alive because of her choice. The formal hearing convened at 800 hours in the base conference room, with a panel of 3 senior officers presiding over Maria's case. The atmosphere was solemn but respectful, acknowledging both the seriousness of the charges and the extraordinary circumstances that had led to them. Maria entered wearing her dress uniform, every ribbon and medal polished to perfection, representing 13 years of distinguished service. General Patricia Hayes, the senior member of the panel, had flown in specifically for this hearing. Her reputation as a fair but strict disciplinarian was well known throughout the Marine Corps, and her presence indicated that Maria's case was being taken seriously at the highest levels of command. The general's opening remarks emphasized that while they understood the human elements involved, military discipline must be maintained. The prosecution's case was straightforward and damning. They presented evidence that Maria had willfully disobeyed direct orders from her commanding officer, endangered her Marines by taking them through unsecured territory, and violated established protocols for medical evacuations. The prosecutor painted her actions as well-intentioned but ultimately reckless, arguing that good intentions could not excuse such serious breaches of military discipline. Maria's defense counsel, Captain Jennifer Walsh, methodically dismantled the prosecution's arguments. She presented detailed medical testimony showing that Jake would have died without immediate surgical intervention, making Maria's decision not reckless but necessary. Expert witnesses testified that the route Maria chose was actually safer than the approved return path, which had been compromised by insurgent activity. The most powerful testimony came from Maria's own Marines. One by one, they took the stand to describe their sergeant's leadership under fire and their complete confidence in her judgment. Corporal Williams provided particularly compelling evidence about Jake's deteriorating condition, using medical terminology he had learned during his combat medic training to explain why every minute of delay could have been fatal. Jake himself appeared via video link from the military hospital in Germany, still recovering but clearly alert and articulate. His testimony about Maria's mentorship and the life-saving decision she had made brought visible emotion to several panel members. He stated firmly that he would not be alive without her willingness to risk her career for his welfare. The hearing took an unexpected turn when Jake's parents were permitted to address the panel. His mother, a soft-spoken woman from rural Kansas, spoke with quiet dignity about receiving the phone call that every military family fears. Her voice broke slightly as she described, learning that her son was alive because one Marine had been willing to risk everything to save. Another General Hayes questioned Maria directly about her decision-making process during the critical moments after Jake was wounded. Maria's responses were clear and professional, explaining how her assessment of his medical condition, combined with her knowledge of the terrain and enemy activity, had led her to conclude that immediate evacuation was his only chance for survival. The panel recessed for deliberation after 6 hours of testimony, leaving Maria and her supporters to wait anxiously for the verdict. The base had become unusually quiet, with Marines throughout the facility aware that the outcome of this hearing would set precedents for future cases involving the balance between following orders and protecting wounded comrades. During the recess, messages of support continued to pour in from across the military community. Senior non-commissioned officers from other branches of service sent letters describing similar situations they had faced and praising Maria's courage in making an impossible decision. These testimonials painted a picture of a leader who exemplified the best traditions of military service. When the panel reconvened after 2 hours of deliberation, the tension in the room was palpable. General Hayes announced that while Maria had technically violated direct orders, the panel found that her actions were justified by the extraordinary circumstances she faced. Her decision had been based on sound tactical and medical reasoning, and her leadership had likely saved not only Jake's life, but potentially prevented additional casualties. The formal verdict was a finding of guilt on the technical charge of disobeying orders, but with significant mitigating circumstances that warranted minimal punishment. Maria was given a formal reprimand that would be removed from her record after 1 year, and she was permitted to retain her rank and position. The panel noted that her actions, while unauthorized, exemplified the highest traditions of Marine Corps leadership. General Hayes personally addressed Maria after announcing the verdict, speaking about the impossible positions that combat leaders sometimes face. She praised Maria's courage and judgment while emphasizing that such decisions should never be made lightly. The general's words carried weight throughout the Marine Corps, effectively ending any criticism of Maria's actions. The reaction to the verdict was overwhelmingly positive throughout the base. Marines who had been quietly supporting Maria felt vindicated, while those who had questioned her judgment acknowledged that the panel's decision balanced military discipline with recognition of extraordinary circumstances. The case became a teaching moment about leadership under extreme pressure. News of the verdict reached Jake within hours, and his reaction was one of relief and gratitude. Video calls with Maria showed him continuing to recover, with doctors now confident that he would make a complete return to duty within 6 months. His progress vindicated every element of Maria's decision and provided powerful validation for those who had supported her. The broader military community took notice of Maria's case, with many seeing it as an example of how the armed forces could balance strict discipline with recognition of moral courage. Military leadership schools began using her case as a study in ethical decision-making under extreme pressure, examining how leaders should respond when regulations conflict with immediate threats to human life. Colonel Morrison, who had initially opposed Maria's decision, privately apologized to her after the hearing. He explained that his objections had been based on concern for her career and the precedent her actions might set. But he now understood that some situations required leaders to accept personal risk for the welfare of their troops. Maria returned to her duties with renewed respect from her Marines and her peers. The experience had tested every aspect of her character and judgment, but it had also demonstrated the depth of her commitment to the welfare of those under her command. Her leadership style became more confident and decisive, shaped by the knowledge that she had faced the ultimate test and succeeded. The case also had lasting effects on military medical evacuation procedures. New guidelines were established that gave field commanders greater flexibility in emergency situations, recognizing that rigid adherence to protocol could sometimes cost lives. Maria's actions had literally changed military policy, ensuring that future commanders would have clearer authority to save their Marines. In the weeks following the hearing, Maria received numerous requests for interviews and speaking engagements. She declined most of these, preferring to focus on her duties and her Marines rather than becoming a public figure. Her quiet professionalism in handling the aftermath of her case further enhanced her reputation throughout the military community. The Medal of Commendation ceremony was scheduled for the following month, recognizing Maria's courage and leadership during the engagement that had wounded Jake. However, she knew that the real recognition had already come in the form of a young Marine's life saved and a military justice system that had chosen compassion over rigid discipline.